You better fix these trousers, mister. Hello, pantaloons, and anybody else who might be joining me for the first time. If you are new, even if you're not new to Dr. Pants, if you're new to my YouTube channel, please like the video and subscribe. This is the first video in a series of videos that I'm putting out this week about the history of Dr. Pants, sort of documenting some of that through some interviews with past members and a couple unreleased recordings and things like that. And you know, I'm doing this because, well, the original plan was to have a 20th anniversary concert or concerts, and thank you, COVID-19, that did not happen. And so since we can't do that, we're going to do as much as I can in terms of a next best thing or whatever. And we're going to do this deal with some, like I said, some video content. And hopefully it'll be enjoyable for some of you who've been following what I'm doing or I've been doing for a long time. And then maybe it'll be educational for some of you people who are relatively new to what I do and are curious about how all that happened and how some of this music and things like that came about. This video right here is going to sort of be some Dr. Pants prehistory, some of the history of sort of what I did or my development as a musician before I took on the name Dr. Pants and before that whole thing started up. And you know, the truth is that, you know, I've always been a huge music fan ever since I was a little kid, digging around in my parents' record collection, and was, you know, sort of transfixed enough by the idea of trying to write my own music that even though when I was a kid I studied, you know, like classical piano, I didn't really get very far in terms of trying to write or compose anything with the piano. But when I was around 11 or 12, I did start trying to write song lyrics. They were all terrible, of course, because I was 11 or 12 or whatever. And they didn't even have like the charm of being sort of like, you know, sort of primitively brilliant, you know, in the way that like you could hope, you know, like maybe it's like, oh, it's, you know, it's good punk rock because it's just, you know, raw, unbridled emotion without any, you know, sort of artifice attached to it. No. It was just bad. They were just bad. Then a couple years later, I started playing guitar, and basically, as soon as I knew enough chords on the guitar to write a song with, I wrote a song on the guitar. And I wrote lyrics to it too, but neither of those first couple of things were any good either. And then from there, since I didn't really feel equipped to sort of write the kind of song musically that I really wanted to write, I just sort of kept writing lyrics. And I started to the first couple of years of high school was just writing lyrics. And then by the time, sometime in like the spring of my sophomore year, I managed to sort of start, you know, putting some lyrics and music together again. And finally, sometime like that spring, I managed to sort of write a song or two that I actually felt like were worth singing and that I wanted to perform. And at this point, I have to bring up Unitarian Universalism because well, first of all, if you don't know what Unitarian Universalism is, it is a fairly liberal spiritual belief system, and there are UU churches all over the United States and all over the world, but there aren't, unless you live in a really big city, there aren't a lot of them. There are probably just a couple, maybe one or two in your city. But I grew up in that church. If you want to know more about it, I'll put a link in the description. But I grew up in that church, and you know, the UUs being sort of chill and liberal as they are, they love their music, and they love a lot of them love their rock and roll music. And then, of course, certainly their children who, by the time we were all in high school, we were veritable, music freaks. Like we were as involved, as attached as any teenager to our music, but probably even more so. And so there were a number of opportunities to perform that I was given, because of the UU church that I attended. A number of which took place at what were called rallies. So if you were in high school in the UU church, your youth group went to these things called rallies, where one church in sort of your district, which our district encompassed, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Missouri, and Arkansas, I think. And if you were in one of those states, in a youth group in one of those states, you would go to these rallies where a bunch of youth groups from all over the district would converge on one church for a weekend, and everybody would just hang out. And there were talent shows, and so I was always playing my songs in these UU youth group talent shows at these rallies. And then also my home church here in Oklahoma City would have an annual, what they called Music Fest every year, where they would set up a PA on the front steps of the church outside the sanctuary, and people would ask to play, and it was mostly probably adult congregation members who just got up there and played some covers and whatever. But I started to play at the Music Fest, and I started to play my original songs at the Music Fest, and it just was a huge contributor to my early development. The idea that I was able to actually perform songs in front of people somewhat regularly, as opposed to, just having to play in my bedroom because I didn't have anywhere else to play my songs. And when I was a senior in high school, I was gifted a 4-track cassette analog recorder for Christmas. And nowadays people you get a computer, you get a laptop with GarageBand on it. But no, at the time, if you were interested in trying to start to record your own music at home without any other assistance, you got a 4-track cassette recorder. And so that was a huge deal for me. By the time I received that cassette recorder, I probably had written 12 to 15 songs that I actually felt kind of proud of. And I started recording my first album. I think by the time I got to March of my senior year in the spring there, I was in full swing of trying to make an album. And by April, I had finished it. It was called Music for the Purple Ants. I made copies onto cassette myself, literally mixing the record every time I made a copy. So if you have a copy of Music for the Purple Ants from 1993, I literally mixed that record onto your cassette as it was recording, every time I made a copy. Okay. Not until several years later in college, when I finally just did a mix of that record onto a DAT machine, did I have something that I could make copies from that just had a consistent mix, sort of without mistakes on it. Okay. Within a month after that, I even actually had recorded an additional EP called Week. So I'm going to pause in here and play you a little bit of a track or two from those releases here, so you can hear kind of what was going on at the time.
Matt never told me where I was to begin, but the mushroom houses, they are symbols. They really know what's up, just like Matt. Guess what? The Smurfs are communists. I learned that from Matt. He's a cool guy to have met one night. He knows just where he's at. It's hard to find. Just don't join a convent, and I think I'll be alright. For now I'll sit in darkness and wait for you to light. And I don't play hard to get again, and I don't care if you get sick again. I don't care as long as I'm there with you. Jamming, play or die just to feel the rush. Grooving, all alone, but they wouldn't shut up. Musician, he forgot the words. It's absurd. It's absurd.
So yeah, so that's a little bit of stuff from the music for the Purple Ants album and stuff from the subsequent week EP. Those are both 25th anniversary editions of those are both on my Bandcamp right now. If you're interested in going and checking out some more of that stuff, I'll keep the 25th anniversary editions on there probably for at least another year until I can put out a 25th anniversary edition of sort of the last album that I recorded just on my 4-track before Dr. Pants happened. And I'll, that's because that's going to be next year. And so those will be up there for a little while if you're interested. And then the next thing that sort of happened that was notable also through the UU Church is that at a rally, it was the last rally that I got to go to before I went to college. It was in Tulsa, and my friend Garrett Brown, who was from the Tulsa youth group, and then my friend Matt Brownlee, who was from the Fort Worth youth group, were both there. Garrett and I wrote a song together that was called King Gourd, and that's gourd like the decorative seasonal vegetable, and not gourd like the abbreviation for Gordon, like they say in Canada or whatever. And so we wrote this song called King Gourd. And then Matt joined us and played bongos on the recording that we made of it there at the rally. And we became sort of this group. We sort of christened ourselves as a band. We called ourselves Dogs Sipping Vermouth. And, you know, not everybody who was involved in this band necessarily looks back on it with as much regard as I do, but it ended up being a really important thing for me in my development as a musician. Every so often, like during summers and winter breaks from college, we would end up reconvening and playing some music together. Sometimes it was maybe just 2 of us and not 3 of us playing music together. But those guys were really important to me because eventually, as time went on, you know, they started to have their own voices as songwriters, and they started to write songs that were really, really good and were super inspiring to me. And what I realized, you know, what Matt and Garrett and the songs they wrote taught me, and even into later years, once Dog Sipping Vermouth was long gone and they were off doing their own projects and I was doing Dr. Pants and whatever, those guys taught me that you can, if you try and you work at it, you can legitimately just sort of write the kind of songs that you want to write. You know, it doesn't have to be, well, I just write and just whatever comes out is what comes out. You know, that is definitely how I wrote songs for the first however many years that I wrote songs. I sat down and what came out was what came out. And sometimes it really felt like it was something cool that I really was excited about, and sometimes maybe not. And, you know, but what I learned from watching Matt and Garrett develop as songwriters was, you know, they made conscious choices in terms of sort of the direction they wanted to pursue as songwriters, and they went and they did it. And so that ended up being a huge influence on me, and certainly on the way I started to approach songwriting, probably, you know, starting about halfway through college or a little further, maybe even. And so here's a little bit of Dog Sipping Vermouth.
Gorgeous hopes my fish don't bite. Gore, yeah.
I mean that.
chord tells me of many things, of wide spectrum and concern.
It's hot.
He is so good, he is so nice, he's no ordinary fern. King Gourd, king of the vegetables, benefactor to the wheat. Gourd the great, king of the vegetables, we all bow at his feet. 2, 3, 4. King Gourd, king of the vegetables, benefactor to the wheat.
And so throughout college, you know, I kept writing songs and I kept making records. I kept making little albums on my 4-track cassette recorder. And there were 2 of them specifically that I released in college. In between my freshman and sophomore year, I released The Heathen's Road to Heaven. Here's a little bit of something from that.
Give me nothing that merits my soul. You know I've gotta go now. The ocean's growing cold.
And then later on, after Christmas, so about halfway through my junior year, I released the album Mr. Utopia. And here's a little bit of something from that.
Take some time to think, and then your heart will sink. Give it time to infect you. Is it gonna make you feel okay? Hell no. Hell no.
Heathen's Road to Heaven, the 25th anniversary edition of that, is also available on Bandcamp right now. But Mr. Utopia doesn't get its 25th anniversary until next year in 2021 because it originally came out in 1996. And so stay tuned for that. Probably sometime around the beginning of next year, I'll put out a 25th anniversary of that record with some bonus tracks and things like that. You know, and eventually, you know, I got all the way to my senior year and I was writing things that not only would be a part of my senior concert, which was sort of definitely a moment for me where I felt like some of my vision of who I wanted to be as a musician and composer really started to crystallize. Not only did a lot of that material get performed then, but it also got recordings of it got included on the Feasel Day album. There are a couple tracks on the Feasel Day album that are actually recordings of pieces from my senior concert. How to Make a Boy with a Horn Growing Out of His Head and Glisten are both performances from my senior concert. I wanted to use more performances from my senior concert, but there were mistakes and issues and things like that, and nothing else ended up making it onto that record, but that's okay. Yeah, and after that, I moved back to Oklahoma City after having hung out in Santa Fe for a year, but we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in the next video, because once we get to that point, we're really starting to kind of be in the germination phase of what Dr. Pants would be, at least for its first few years. And so, but that's a little bit about sort of the prehistory of Dr. Pants, some stuff about the music that I made and the circumstances that I made it under leading up to my adoption of the Dr. Pants name. And so, yeah, stay tuned tomorrow for another video where I do I talk a little bit about the year or two immediately preceding the start of Dr. Pants, and then in that same video we'll have a sort of videotape Zoom session with some of the guys that I played with during the first incarnation or two of Dr. Pants, and we'll talk a little bit about what I remember and what they remember and things like that. So anyway, I hope you're just on board for some of these 20th anniversary videos, and that you'll enjoy them. And like I said, if you haven't liked the video or subscribed, please do, and I'll see you tomorrow.